Tonight we begin with a focus on the global refugee crisis. Amnesty International is accusing wealthy countries of neglecting their refugee responsibilities, leaving just 10 nations to shoulder the burden of caring for more than half of the world's refugees. In East Africa, Kenyan officials say they are fed up with carrying such a heavy burden and will close down its massive refugee camp and repatriate more than 300,000 Somali refugees. Kenya alleges the Somali terrorist group Al-Shabaab is using the camp as a recruiting ground to radicalize people who then launch attacks inside Kenya's borders. Kenya's Foreign Minister Amina Mohammed says the repatriation is being carried out humanely and in line with international obligations. However, a new Human Rights Watch report says the repatriation of Somali refugees from the Dadaab refugee camp in Kenya fails to meet international standards. Now, for more insight on the refugee crisis, Bill Frelick, director of the Human Rights Watch Refugee Program, just returned from the Dadaab refugee camp in northeastern Kenya and joins me to talk about the dire situation there. Bill, welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you for having me.
Now, the first question a person has to ask, what are the international standards that you say Kenya is not keeping up to?
There are basically two standards here for voluntary repatriation. One is that people have an actual choice, a real choice between going and staying. And in this case, the Kenyan government has not given any assurances whatsoever that after November anyone will be allowed to stay. So there's a great deal of fear, a great deal of anxiety about what is going to happen with the announcement of this camp closure, and a great deal of pressure being put on people to return. The second point for voluntary return is that people need to be informed about conditions back in the country of origin, the place to which they will be returning. And in this case, the information that's being provided to the refugees is extremely superficial, out of date, and misleading.
So first, who's providing the information? We believe that UNHCR is supposed to provide this information.
Correct.
Is it that the information is not accurate, is not clear to the people, or perhaps the information they get scares them off?
Well, the information is provided by the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, that's the UN Refugee Agency, and it's tasked to provide that information as part of its job to facilitate voluntary returns. However, we saw what are called the help desks that are located in the camps. And literally, we were in the Hagadera camp, which is a huge camp within the Dadaab complex. And there was literally one desk, one man sitting at one desk with one computer terminal. And outside, early in the morning, there were hundreds and hundreds of people that were trying to get in. And the information that was provided on Mogadishu, they had a pamphlet. There was one line on security, basically saying that there are police patrols in Mogadishu.
That's a joke.
That's the entirety of the information that was being provided to people. And that pamphlet had not been updated since December 2015.
So
this was in August that we were there.
Failure on the part of the UNHCR in terms of the kind of information they're providing, and of course the mode of providing this information.
Exactly. I mean, you need to have informed consent, and that clearly the standards are not being met.
Yes. Now, on the Kenya side, we know that the country does not have a refugee integration policy. Does it look humane, though, to have these people live in a refugee camp for decades? Well,
I mean, the alternative of pushing people back into Somalia, a situation that's actually quite dangerous still, it's an unsettled situation. UNHCR will not be promoting even voluntary repatriation because they say that the situation is not conducive to returns. However, they will facilitate if it's a voluntary return. What are the alternatives for people? If, in fact, the government was closing the camp and saying that people could work and they could be sustained and integrated into the society, that would be one thing. But clearly, given the security rationale for closing the camp, that's not what the Kenyans are intending.
Yeah. Now, Bill, could there be perhaps another option? For instance, Kenyan authorities negotiating with other third-party countries where refugees are willing to move to those countries that are, have a repatriation or rather refugee integration program or are willing to take them in for some time. They could facilitate that.
Well, as the introduction to this segment indicated, there's been a real lack of international solidarity, a lack of international support for refugee resettlement in particular. And we have, of course, the Syrian situation, sucking whatever willingness there might be to take refugees. The situation in Somalia is what's called a protracted situation.
Yeah.
It's been there since the early 1990s. And the number of people realistically that could be resettled to third countries, unfortunately, is a very small fraction. So we really are talking about what additional support can be provided to the Kenyan government, mostly financial support, to help build the infrastructure, to help make it possible. Just last year, the World Food Program reduced the rations to the camp by 30%. So that gives you an idea that people are having fewer resources available to them just to sustain their level of existence, of subsistence, in a place where they're not allowed to leave, they're not allowed to work, and they're really restricted in many, many ways.
Well, we just hope that somehow there will be some resolution to this. Bill, thanks a lot for coming along and sharing your experiences with us. That is Bill Frolick, who is the director of the Human Rights Watch Refugee Program.